Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Student Affairs Live, your weekly web show about student affairs issues for student affairs professionals. It's another awesome Wednesday, and I'm happy to have this show for everybody. My name's Eric Stoller, and again, we are live on the air. We're going to be taking your questions, having a great show, talking about higher education, the news, student affairs. It's going to be awesome. Great show, great topic, great conversation. As always, want to give a little shout out here to our hashtag. It's really large. It's Essay Live. That's # Essay Live. Follow the action, tweet your questions, and we'll answer them, get it out there, lots of information. Also, want you to give a shout out to the folks at Higher Ed Live because Student Affairs Live is part of the Higher Ed Live network. So follow at Higher Ed Live for all kinds of information, tweets, information during the show, ask your questions, etc. And folks, all this wouldn't be possible without our sponsors. Student Affairs Live is sponsored by Integral, the creators of the Schools app on Facebook. Be sure to check out their webinar series about how they can help you leverage Facebook to increase yield and retention. And that happens this Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. And we're going to send out a tweet with that link here in just a few seconds. So folks, we got a great show today. I'm really excited about it. As you know, I like to bring on guests from a wide variety of associations, etc. And today's guest, I'm going to bring her on really quickly for a little quick intro before we get into the news. Today's guest, folks, is Gwen Dungy. Hey, Gwen, could you say hi to everybody?
Hi, everybody. Glad to be here.
Thanks, Gwen. And I'm going to go into the news, so if you have any thoughts about some of these news stories, please feel free to shout out while I'm giving a little voiceover information. So, folks, The feature that we like to do in this show is called Challenge and Support. For those of you from the student development field, you're going to recognize that from Nev at Sanford. It's extremely famous student development theory. So it's kind of my header for the news. So let's get into it right now. First story comes again from Catholic University of America. A lot of folks have been following this story. It comes from Inside Higher Ed. I've seen it in some other news publications, and this is from ABC News. And it was a really interesting story because their president came out and said, we want to change our residence halls, and we want to go to single-sex residence halls. And some of the rhetoric has been really interesting. You know, the actual president of the institution talking about, again, the sort of the quote that's been coming out over and over again is that he thought that young women would have a civilizing influence on young men, and that just hits me the wrong way, and I'm sure it hits a lot of you the wrong way as well. And I saw another quote too from someone named Sally Rubenstone, who's mentioned in this ABC News article. It says that Sally's a college advisor for collegeconfidential.com, and she says that single-sex dorms are a good idea for freshmen because they would provide a safe haven, and that when you remove all the noise of that sexual energy, you're just giving them that chance to say, phew, close the door, and at least for 10 minutes until their boyfriend shows up. And of course, folks, what does that say for folks that aren't straight? They're sort of assuming that everybody is straight that goes to Catholic University, and as we probably know, that's not the case. And so a lot of sexist rhetoric, a lot of heterosexist rhetoric going on in that article, and from some of the sound bites in there. So it's definitely something to read, definitely something to think about. Especially something to think about this week was a story from InsideHigherEd.com about the ACT and its validity being questioned with regards to some of the parameters of the test. Specifically that the science and reading sections had little or no ability to help colleges predict whether applicants will succeed. And I think that that's a really interesting thing because for those folks that work in the enrollment management space, you use the ACT, the SAT, student sort of letters for application, that kind of thing. So this is a really interesting aspect of sort of a tool that folks have used as a predictor for enrollment for quite a while here in terms of success. So definitely an article to take a look at. Want to kind of go here to Wisconsin. Interesting story about a current sort of policy law on the books that the students in the University of Wisconsin system who were undocumented could go to school and have sort of resident tuition. And it looks like that's probably going to be ended, or sort of ending soon anyway. The new governor, Scott Walker, is expected to sign this sort of 2-year budget that's going to ban resident tuition for undocumented immigrants. And so it's going to be really unfortunate because, it ends this program that sort of was signed into law a couple of years ago. And so you've got students in the pipeline potentially, it looks like, at least 100 or so who are going to go from paying in-state tuition to out-of-state tuition for their education in the system of Wisconsin. And you're looking at a massive increase in funding and what it's going to cost for students to attend. So folks, I think undocumented students and higher education in the United States is going to be an issue that is as large in terms of policy, nationwide sort of politicking, as the conceal and carry issue has been as of late. Sort of in that vein, there's a politician in Pennsylvania who kind of wants to introduce a Pennsylvania-based sort of state-driven DREAM Act, as it were. It's not the federal DREAM Act that hasn't been passed, but sort of a Pennsylvania version of the DREAM Act, which would allow, again, for undocumented students who've been potentially attending the K through 12 system for most of their lives to attend higher education in the state of Pennsylvania for resident tuition, which of course has gotten a lot of lawmakers and a lot of folks sort of taking umbrage with this. But again, you know my side of the story, folks. I think it's a great thing because, again, most undocumented students, they can't necessarily afford 3 times the normal rate of tuition.
Eric, that story does resonate with me and with NASPA, because I think you might realize that when Haku put together the coalition to try to inform Congress and educate Congress about the DREAM Act, NASPA was one of the associations part of that, and I made a statement at the press conference about it. We really need to look at that and think about the future of this country, and thinking about people who are already living here, who've gone to school here. Like, is that very logical to not allow them to continue college in the way they can?
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think that Rachel, who is tweeting right now for @HigherEdLive, if she can find that some of those statements on the NASPA website, maybe she can tweet that out to folks who are watching the stream. But thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, I think I don't know, but it might be on the website. Yeah.
Okay. Well, another Midwestern story. It seems like a lot of stuff's happening from the Midwest, and this comes from the Ohio State University. A little bit of controversy. As you know, earlier on a previous episode, I reported that Jim Tressel had stepped down as the head coach of the Ohio State football team, and now another story comes out of Ohio State that their top compliance person was driving around in a free automobile that was given to him by a dealership, and they were also saying how in the report how the athletic director has a car as well. However, it's written into his contract. Although, honestly, folks, the athletic director, I think in the article it says he earns $800,000 a year. Just get a car already, buy it out with your own money, and sort of, step aside from some of these issues where people think you're dirty, even if you're not. It's in your contract, okay. But if you're the compliance officer at the school and your school is under fire for all sorts of issues and violations that have happened, and it's been documented that it's happened, it's not alleged anymore, give the car back, buy your own car. I mean, it just, you want to step aside so that there is no potential that folks think that you're doing any sort of wrongdoing or anything that's shady. And I think that, it's just common sense. So, interesting story. I hope the folks at Ohio State can get things figured out. It's a great institution, great students, great people working there, but they got to get this whole compliance thing with athletics figured out, and I think they got to clean some house.
Eric, I'm so glad you said something about the institution being a great institution, because, sometimes, if one person does something very negative, people paint the whole institution that way. And I think that's really unfortunate. So I love it the way you always come in and you'll say, yes, but that's this piece. It's not the whole institution. I think that's great.
I mean,
very fair.
They have, how many students attend the Ohio State University? It's massive. They are one of the premier institutions of higher learning in this country, and I think as a state school they do so many wonderful things. So I think, again, athletics obviously gets the news, it gets the journalists' attention, and it gets the sort of soundbite on ESPN or whatever. But again, they've got some issues, especially with athletics, that they need to work on.
Well, they should be talking about how great their student affairs division is at Ohio State. We just had the vice president at Ohio State do a speech at our assessment and persistence conference, and she did a marvelous job. Nice. It's too bad we don't get that on the news, but people wouldn't be interested in that, right?
If we could get ESPN to run more stories about student affairs, I think we'd be set.
That'd be great, wouldn't it? Yes.
All right, we got one more story here for Challenge and Support, and it comes from ACPA, the sister association of NASPA, and it was in their developments sort of publication. And it was a really good article, and I wanted to share this article with folks because it's something that we rarely hear about or talk about in student affairs. And it was by Will Barrett, who's a professor at Indiana State University, and it was the title is "A Seat at the Table for Atheists: Negotiating Inclusion and Religious Pluralism, a Personal Narrative. And it's Will's sort of story about what it means to be an atheist in education, and just in a space where we often talk about spirituality and religion, but we don't necessarily talk a lot about how atheism plays into that, and how we as student affairs practitioners can support students who identify as either atheist or agnostic. I think that's something that hopefully Will's article can be used maybe as a teaching and learning tool for grad programs in student affairs.
Mm-hmm.
So, Gwen, I don't know if you're a big fan of the show, but we like to do a little thing called the Unsolicited Shout Out of the Week this week. So, so this week, the unsolicited shout out goes up to my friends up north. The folks who are doing the Caucus Conference that just concluded today, Caucus 2011. They've been just doing an amazing job with hashtagging their conference on Twitter, using #Caucus, and it's been just nice to sort of see what's going on with the state of student affairs up in Canada, and I know that it's just been really cool to see, because I know that Gwen, you could speak to this too, that Canadian student affairs, especially with things like social media and sort of student affairs marketing communication, it's not in the same place as it is here in the States.
Yeah, well, I don't know where they are on that, but I do know the people in Caucus are very much involved in student affairs. They come to conferences in NASPA. We've gone there, and I know they're expanding. When they were at NASPA this year, they have a new executive director. Mm-hmm. So I'm really very happy for them and how they're being able to expand the administrative structure of Caucus.
Well, and their director, is that Jennifer Hamilton?
I think so. I've only met her one time. Yes.
Yeah, I think it's really just. I think a lot of folks, especially here in the States, and I would imagine that the majority of viewers of this show are watching from the U.S. Might not be as familiar with what's going on in Canada and sort of the state of student affairs in Canada. So it was just a really cool conversation that they were having via Twitter, and that they shared with all of us.
We love them as partners. We love it that they come here. We love to talk with them, learn from them, and I really, individually, I've talked to a lot of them, and we can learn a lot from the members of Caucus.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, folks, that concludes the Challenge and Support, a.k.a. the news. We have, I want to say, I'm a little nervous about this episode. And the reason I'm nervous is when I first met Gwen Dungy, my guest today, this was in 2003 when I was this big. I was a brand new professional in the field of student affairs. And I didn't know anybody. I go to this regional conference in Milwaukee. I sit down, and I'm sitting next to none other than Gwen Dungy, the executive director of NASPA, one of the premier student affairs associations in the country. And I was like, "Hi, my name's Eric," and she says, "Hi, I'm Gwen," and that was sort of my first sort of meeting with you. And I want to say it's been a pleasure to know you and just sort of learn from you as a professional, because a lot of folks might say this on Twitter or to me later on or whatever, and they'll say, "Wow, you're really laying it on heavy." And I'll say this: you told me last week that you have a brand new boss every year.
Yes, I do.
Because you have a new association president every year.
Absolutely.
And I was thinking to myself, you know what that means? That means that Gwen Dungy is amazing, because she has a new boss every year, so she must be doing something right, because otherwise at least one of those people would say, "Let's go."
Well, I have to say we have some amazing leaders in NASPA, and I don't mean to be laying it on thick either, but I really think we do. And I tell, there are so many people I tell, this is the best job in the world. I tell them I would do it without money, but I don't want them to tell my bosses this. But, there are some advantages in having a new boss every year, too.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Can you imagine what that might be?
Well, since I am my own boss currently, I would say this, that there's lots of learning moments that would occur, and I would think that you as a professional, when you're encountering a new vice president, because typically the presidents of NASPA are VPs of student affairs or deans of students, they themselves have gotten to their position because of their leadership, because of the things that they've done, and so I would think that you sort of add layer upon layer of all the best bits that they bring. And
I learned so much. I learned so much from them. I'm thinking, it's wonderful having a new boss every year. But one good thing is we're together for at least 3 years, because you know how the governance structure works. They're president, elect president, and past president. And so I get to know them and I get to love them, and I feel as if we're going to be friends forever. And I talk about the learning. And then when you think you just soaked up everything you can from that person, then a new one comes in. So when you think about strengths, my number one strength is learning. So every opportunity I want to learn something. So it's just really great. It really is. People think it's difficult. I say it points to one of my strengths too, in that I have to be flexible. I have to know that just because I did things one way the last year doesn't mean I can do it the same way next year. So it keeps me on my toes too. It's great.
Yeah, it keeps you learning, keeps you innovating, keeps you.
It absolutely does.
Keeps you, your creativity alive.
Yeah.
Well, folks, before we get too far into it, I want to make sure that everybody knows that you can use the SA Live hashtag on Twitter to ask us questions, participate in the dialogue, and Gwen and I will be happy to answer your questions. I'm talking here today with Gwen Dungy, Executive Director of NASPA, and the topic of this show, loosely anyway, as we framed it, is completion and persistence in higher education. And Gwen and I were chatting last week about this, and it's a topic that, it kind of comes back and forth in higher education. And Gwen, why do you think completion and persistence is sort of on the forefront right now of your radar and of NASPA's radar when it comes to the field of student affairs?
Well, I think it comes down to data and numbers. When we begin to look at how many students are graduating from college, it's below 70%, and a lot lower than that for many colleges and universities. But for the best ones, it may be 68% graduate in 6 years. And when you think about the cost of college, you think about where this country is internationally, where we want to be as having the largest proportion of our citizens graduate from college. Some issues there. The president set that as a big goal for us. The Lumina Foundation set their audacious goal for 2025, increasing the number to 60%, I think, of our students graduating from college. I think it really means something when enough people are on the same page, when the foundations that support education are on the same page as the federal government, where states are all looking at college completion, where we in colleges and universities are saying, 4 years is not the norm anymore. It's now 6 years, where we're concentrating on retention. And we began to use the word persistence. I was at our assessment and persistence conference recently, and I gave some opening remarks. And I said to the participants, I said, you might notice that we used to call our conference the Assessment and Retention Conference, but now we're calling it Assessment and Persistence, because just retaining a student in college a long time doesn't mean the student's doing well and is going to graduate with a quality degree. And then as soon as I thought, persistence is the word to use, I'm realizing that persistence may not be exactly what you want either. What you really want is completion. So I told them next year it may be called assessment and completion. What we're looking at is students who come into college, and we hope they come in with a goal to succeed. And, we in student affairs, that's what we want to do. We want to provide them those experiences where they can learn more, but we also want to provide those learning support services that will help them succeed as well. So I think we're all on that same page right now. We look at where our country is as far as the economy, where we stand in relation to the world, because we're so international now. We can't think within the boundaries of the United States. We have got to have more people graduating. We look at people who are saying they can't get jobs. Well, yeah, they can't get jobs, many of them, because most jobs that you don't need an education for, are digitized. You don't really need people. So we've got to really work in getting students to complete, as I said, in quality degrees, because they've got to be able to have complex thinking and critical thinking and being able to write.
Well,
I don't mean to go on and on.
Yeah, I think I could probably just listen to you talk for a few hours here, and I had the pleasure of watching and listening to you give a commencement speech.
You saw that?
Yeah. What was that at Gettysburg? Was that?
It was at Gettysburg College in Pennsylvania. I was so honored to do it. When the president called me, had been trying to reach me, and she and I had been missing one another, and I thought, oh man, I used to be on the board there. I guess they want some money. And you know how it is, people are fundraising.
No one's ever asked me to give a commencement speech, so I'll just say that, sure, I know what it's like.
So when she got me on the phone and she said that's what she wanted, I said, are you serious? And I was thrilled. I don't know whether you know the background on it, but instead of just going in and giving the speech, well, if you could read my speech, you realize that I went to talk with students. I always love interacting with students when I go on a campus. People say, well, what do you want when you get here? I want to talk to a variety of students. And so Julie Ramsey there, allowed me to do that. And the speech was really made up of things they said. I was so encouraged in talking with them. When people ask me, what is the role of student affairs? Those students really outlined it when you listen to that speech. They said, they prepared us for this, they prepared us for that. I mean, it was just beautiful. So I gave that speech, and the students seemed to enjoy it as well as everybody else. And I'm just glad it's over.
Well, I think that sometimes we're involved as student affairs practitioners in sort of the recruitment of students, the orientation programs, the leadership and development programs, Greek life, student activities, maybe student conduct, maybe disability services, that type of thing. But we're not necessarily involved at the level of where we give the commencement speech. So I think it's really nice that you sort of you sort of see all full circle, from beginning to when someone actually completes their degree.
Yeah. What was really fascinating to me too is this. How we talk about learning outside the classroom and how it prepares you for life and that kind of thing. And we kind of laugh about it. Like we talk about academic and student affairs and the separation and collaboration, but students really don't know one from another, that kind of thing. These students really knew what student affairs was. They didn't call it by the name student affairs, but they said, the learning we have outside the classroom, the ability we have to put into practice what we've learned through service learning and community service. And it was just amazing. Oh, one of the things, if you might recall in the speech was they said that the college had given them something of an assisted living environment because it showed them how to live in community and what the rights are as well as the responsibilities. But they were speaking as if someone in student affairs may have given them the script, and that's not the case. They really understood that their learning was a lot more holistic than what they had learned in a class. And I was just so gratified, and found out that the sister of one of the commencement speaker is going into student affairs. Oh. And it was just great. She wasn't at at the same college, but when she found out I was a commencement speaker, she told her sister, oh, that's the person who's head of an association. I'm going into the field. And so I've had conversation with her too. It's just really beautiful to know that young people are coming into the field and they don't necessarily fall into it. When I had a conversation with her, she said, I sort of fell back to it, she said.
Now, had she been in resident life, or what was her?
No, not yet. She had been active as a student, and had been in student government and doing other things. And she told me that she was preparing to go into another field, pharmacy, for instance. And when she, I think, did an internship or got a job just to test it out, she recalled what she had learned in student services, student affairs, and then she's now back in graduate school and doing an internship at residence life.
Because you were saying, and I think you mentioned it, that you don't want people falling sort of accidentally into student affairs.
Yeah, it'd be, that's why we have that NUF program. It was begun in 1989. At that point, they were looking at it as a minority undergraduate fellows program, saying, look at the demographics of who college students are now. And if these are the demographics, we need to look around and see who are the professionals. If these are professionals, we need to make sure we have some representation, people, who look like students. Well, it started out as a minority undergraduate fellows program, and now it's the NASPA undergraduate fellows program, because we want to get to them while they're undergraduates to say, try this out, have a mentor, think about our Summer Leadership Institute, do an internship at another school, and then decide. So when all of them come into the program, they have an inkling they want to get into it. And, some probably don't go into student affairs when they learn about it. But the good thing is they're making a choice based on information and not that I fell into it. We'll still take those who fell into it. But it's nice when they choose it.
Well, that's good that we're still accepting folks that they didn't dream about student affairs. Yeah, that's good. I think because the majority I would say still is in the field, sort of the area of I didn't think about student affairs when I was an undergraduate student. It just sort of happened. And I think that a push to get folks more sort of familiar with student affairs. The NUF program has been amazing. I mean, hundreds. I mean, how many students have gone through NUF? It just seems like hundreds at this point.
I don't know. Nathan Victoria, who coordinates that for us, we were on a staff meeting this morning, and I think he was saying there was like 150 something who had applied to be fellows. And I'm thinking, that's great. He goes, and that's a little down. I go, what? It really is? I can't tell you how many have gone through. And that's what we're looking at now, is trying to see how we can track them. It's funny, we know some people who came through the NUP program I met one who was a VP recently, somebody who's like some provost. What we want to do is to find them, see where they've gone, and then, be able to show this to people, to say it really makes a difference. We've got them all over in all kinds of places, it's just fabulous.
Well, and speaking of completion and retention, while it might not have sort of started this way, the NUF program, or when it started off as the Minority Undergraduate Fellowship Program, it's a retention program, because when you're connecting students to student affairs mentors in the field, and they could be juniors, I believe, in school, and seniors, it can have a ripple effect where it can play into their lives of helping them complete school.
Oh, absolutely, it can. One of the greatest success stories is, I should say the greatest one that I think of often, because she's so involved in NASPA, is Leslie Ann Brown, who's at Texas A&M now, and she's about to finish her doctorate and to go do an internship at Michigan State University. And she's been one of the co-planners for the placement exchange, serving on the conference planning committee, and you just name it, she's been part of it. And the first time I met her, she was a fellow at Northwestern University one summer. So it's great to see. Eric, I was wondering if I could talk a little more about persistence and completion. Though I don't want to bore you, but could I talk a little bit more about
I was going to hit you with a question. I was coming. I was ready. I wanted to know, and I really wanted to focus on a question that Christopher Conzen asked on Twitter earlier.
Okay.
He wanted to know about how we support students who should perhaps step away from college when there's pressure to focus on completion, because institutionally we talk about, especially folks in sort of the strategic enrollment management realm, talk about how much it costs an institution to recruit a student and then to have a student drop out, but sometimes it's in the right frame for a student to actually say, I'm gonna stop for a while, maybe I'll come back, maybe I won't, but it's okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so hold on to that piece, but let me tell you something that you triggered when you said that about enrollment management. When I was at the commencement at Gettysburg College, one thing that I thought was really beautiful is when those students came across that stage, that platform, and they shook the hand of the president and somebody else, when they came down the steps, the person who was standing at the end of the steps was one of the people in recruitment and enrollment, shaking the hands of these students who graduated. And I thought, that's the way it ought to be. I recruited you in here. I've been supportive while you've been here. And when you leave, I'm here to congratulate you. I thought that was really beautiful. But that piece about that question, it's really a good question. And I tell you what it makes me think about. I talked recently at ASCA, Student Conduct Association. And in order to prepare for that, I spoke with just a number of student conduct officers and asked them about their experiences. I said, those of us who are outside of this, we don't really know what goes on in your world. They were really just marvelous in telling me, the kinds of things they did, and they are true educators. And several of them gave an example of when they had to work with a student and the decision was made that student had to leave. Many of those students came back later, were very successful, and came back to them saying that was the best thing they could have ever done for them, was to give them a timeout. And it's really a timeout. And that's what I think student affairs should be all about, helping students understand, what do I need now? And some of them need that timeout.
Right. Yeah, it's almost, you don't want to get into sort of a almost too goal-oriented mindset of everybody has to finish. It's about what's best for an individual at a given time.
Right.
And we had Daniel Swinton on the show, actually, the president of ASCA. Just a couple of weeks ago, actually.
Oh,
yeah.
Some great people. I had a great time with them. I really did.
So I guess, when you talk about what's happening in Washington, D.C. and some of the policy things that are happening, and I can't remember if you've mentioned it yet, but the Washington Higher Education Secretariat, could you talk about that? I think because folks don't necessarily know what that is, and I think a lot of times we think that NASPA's up there by themselves.
Well, that draws me right back to persistence and completion. NASPA is really proud to be a member of the Washington Higher Education Secretariat. We're among 50 higher ed groups here, and they're all from the financial aid, to the presidential associations, to the attorneys who work in colleges and universities, you name them. There are 50 associations. And what we do is we come together we come together around this common theme of students. And when there is policy, a federal policy involved, especially around financial aid and mandates from the federal government, we try to come together and speak with one voice whenever possible. But one of the things, I'm the new president of ACE, not the new president, but the current president of ACE is Molly Broad. And as president of ACE, she convenes the Washington Higher Education Secretariat. And one of the things she wanted to do was, with the new administration coming in and the Department of Education really looking at, completion and this kind of thing, she and the steering committee of the Secretariat put together 3 working groups. One working group was to look at learning outcomes. Another was to look at teacher education and the Common Core standards. And one working group was to look at persistence and completion. And I had the pleasure of being asked to be chair of this group. We started out with about 17 people, and they were people who were in different roles on the Secretariat. And I also asked Larry Roper and Jillian Kinsey and Denise Sweat, who were not on the Secretariat, because I wanted people on the ground who really knew what was going on in research and who knew what was going on campuses as VPs at community college and at four-year. And we put together our working group, and we had the most wonderful, exciting conversations about, all right, our charge in 2009 was to say, what is it that we can do to help the president reach that goal of more students graduating from college, completing college? We came up with some recommendations, and our recommendations, of course, were around things that the federal government could do and things that colleges and universities could do. But we made them as recommendations for colleges and universities to use if they want to, meaning our associations could share this with their members and they could use it. We weren't trying to prescribe what could be done. We had these federal recommendations around financial aid, and two of the most important ones was to really have a recommitment to student aid based on need and a recommitment to aid such as the Student Support Services Program, TRIO, and Gear Up and Those. But this is what we did. We came up with our recommendations, and they were recommendations like disaggregate the data when you look at how students are doing. So you don't just look at how they're doing as a group, but you disaggregate it so you can know what each demographic of student, how they're doing, so you can really zero in and help that group of students if needed. Really strengthen those bridge programs. Really look at that collaboration between academic and student affairs and try to build bridges between them. So after we came up with the recommendations, one of the things I did was I asked one of our members, Paulette Dowse, if I could talk with some students on her campus at Kingsborough Community College. Well, I talked not only to some fabulous students on her campus to help us understand whether we were going in the right direction on the recommendations, but I talked to her president, Regina Peruggi, and the president was enthusiastic about their learning communities, their I think a single stop program, and what she said to me, I thought was so important. She said, if you just have a program here and a program there, it's not going to work. They have to be coordinated. You have to have more than one thing. And then I talked to several students out at Cal State Dominguez Hills. And when I talked to those students about what they needed, they talked about how important student support services was to them. And these students were now in graduate school. They talked about how a person in student affairs at the community college would make contact with them at the four-year school and help them finish. It was amazing how everything I heard from the students at Kingsborough Community College and at Cal State Dominguez Hills supported the recommendations we're making. And they're all around, what can you do to make sure that more students who are from underserved first-generation groups have a better opportunity to succeed. We were very excited about our recommendations, and we've been talking about them in different places and hoping that people who may not know, well, what is it we need to do here, that they may take what we have as a beginning point to begin to think about. These are some things we might want to look into. I think it would be transforming if they did.
Well, it sounds like it's a continuum of experience that there might be a section that's really relevant to a community college administrator, to someone who works as sort of, the bridge person in that pipeline from a community college to a university, to, from the undergraduate level to the graduate level. So it seems like, you don't have to take the entire document and use it, but you can say, okay, this is the part that's really applicable to the work that I'm doing, the students that I'm serving, and it can be really useful and really relevant. And I think I like the idea that they're recommendations. It's not a mandate, because what works for one institution, what works for one program, isn't going to work for everybody.
And we want to respect the autonomy. And we also had recommendations about students understanding about living in community, about being inclusive, being diverse. We made recommendations about personal and social responsibility. We want students to be critical thinkers. We want them to learn, but we also want them to learn to live in community and be humanitarian. So I feel really good about them. We're just refining them now in some ways. But we started in 2009. December, we received the charge in December 2009, and have been working for over a year on them. And so we feel good about what we've accomplished.
Yeah, sounds amazing. I want to point out that you mentioned Nathan Victoria earlier, and Nathan, he tweeted at me here, and he says that he gave me a little more information about the NUF program.
Oh, fantastic.
And Nathan says that NUF can be even for second-year students at a university, and that looks like in 2010 to 2011, last year anymore, this past year, they had 320 fellows, which is...
I mean, that's what I was amazed at. I think
tremendous.
You were saying, it is a tremendous program, and we meet people all over the place. I don't know where we were doing one of our workshops somewhere. I think it might have been Kevin Kruger, our Associate Executive Director, with me. And a group of men passed by, and one young man turned around and said to me, and he says, "You look familiar. You look familiar." And it's been some years, right? And then he remembered he was a fellow many years ago when I first started at NASPA. And he was in another field, unfortunately. He did not go into student affairs, but fortunately, he received a lot from that program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely, and I want to switch gears just a tad bit here. It's actually maybe not even switching gears, because I think that all too often when you talk about disaggregating data, and you talk about segmenting groups of folks as a way to say, okay, this population is excelling at this level, this population maybe is not, because it's if you lump everybody together, then you could say, well, 66% of et cetera are excelling, and it's not necessarily the case. And I think that one of the things that happens a lot of times in these conversations is that folks often focus on underrepresented groups as being a group of folks that isn't necessarily achieving academically as high as they could be or should be. And I think that's a misnomer in a way, because I've known a ton of students who self-identify as members of underrepresented groups who are academic superstars in high school. And there's a question on Twitter, and I'm gonna go into this question because I think it's really relevant to the conversation. Is how do we focus? And this is from Aaron Breedlove, who I think is a brand new viewer of the show. So thanks for watching, Aaron. How do we focus on the retention of students who are higher achieving in high school, and then college doesn't go so well? Because that happens a lot, where especially the idea of community. When you talk about, for example, I used to be in Oregon, and in the College Assistance Migrant Program in Oregon, you'd have students coming from really small rural towns who were eligible for this program, which supports, in Oregon anyway, a mostly Latino-based population. And you could have students who are almost valedictorians in their high school class, but they get to college, a large institution of 20+ thousand students, and life is a little different.
Yes, it is. I'm sure everybody who's tuned in has some answers to this. And my thinking is, first, you're a big fish in a small pond when you're in high school. It depends on who you're being measured against. And then when you come to college, sometimes that transition is disorienting, and we know that. We also know that at that particular age, when students come to college, this is a time when many of them are going through those challenges of maturing. That's where student affairs is so very important, that we provide those learning support services for students. Some of them will need some counseling. Many of them will need more advising. It's like this. If you know why you're studying something, you do a much better job than if you're just studying for no particular reason. And a lot of it has to do with they don't know why they're taking certain courses. they can't relate what they're what they're learning in class to what they're doing outside of class. So I'm thinking, so what do you do to help those students who obviously are intelligent, obviously can learn because they've done well, and then they don't do well in college? Well, we need to look at them holistically as we do in student affairs. And that is, do you need tutoring? Is this a course that's over your head, that you have a gap between what you learned in high school and what they're asking now in college? Or do you need help with your time management? Are you having such a good time in your social activities? Are you such a student leader that you're spending more time in that than is necessary? Are you having some emotional problems? And that's what we do in student affairs. We look at those students and we find out, what support do you need to learn best? And that's why I think we're valuable. And I think if anybody thinks they don't see the need for student affairs, it's this great question that was just asked. What do you do with these students who obviously can succeed but are not succeeding?
Absolutely. And I think as a former academic advisor, and I would sort of say that academic advising almost sits in sort of a gray area of academic affairs and student affairs in terms of function. I think that, that's where the idea of let's get rid of the silos, let's focus on collaboration and create sort of comprehensively woven together structures that can support students, because our students don't exist in silos. Why should we?
That's right. And one of the things I remember is when Richard Keeling used to give some speeches, he would talk about how, we don't separate the student's body from the student's brain, that we have to deal with all the messy parts of the student. And I think that's what we do in student affairs. And what we have not done as well is to explain this to others. We tried to do that, and we began doing that when we came out with Learning Reconsidered in, I guess, 2004, and then Learning Reconsidered 2 in 2006 with all of our partners. And we talk about everybody being involved. There is no silos. You don't separate developing students from learning students. And I think we need to get back into that place where we're educating all of our colleagues about this.
Well, and Gwen, you were telling me last week that you've got some trips coming up here, some trips abroad.
Yeah.
And I know that NASPA, and I don't apologize, I don't know the exact wording, but in the sort of mission and vision of NASPA is sort of an international view of student affairs, and it's sort of what's going on with sort of student affairs and the world, because it's so easy to just talk about the United States because that's the sphere that we both exist in the majority of our lives.
Yes. Well, I have to say that NASPA has quite a history in being international in, what should I say, and wanting to be international and being international in some of the things we've done. I know when I came to NASPA back in 1995, some of the people I met had just come from an international exchange in France, and they were all high about it. Some had just come back from Mexico. And since I've been at NASPA, just some of the things that, we don't just sit here and wait on people from outside the U.S. to come to NASPA. We try to move out to them with our international exchanges. We had the International Symposium. It was just beginning when I came, where a lot of people come, but then our members through the regions go to other countries. We just have people coming back now from an exchange in Ireland. I went in Mexico. NASPA gave me a sabbatical, and I spent 10 weeks in Mexico, traveling around to colleges and universities on something of a goodwill tour in a lot of ways, learning as much as I could. Went to, because of Texas A&M, was able to represent student affairs in Beijing, and went to their 50th anniversary of their National Academy for Education Administrators there, and talked about student affairs and nation building. Went to Jordan. The Department of Education and State Department asked to go and represent student affairs there. I don't want to forget and see where else, but now I think I'm leaving Friday to go to Norway, and I feel so. I am so pleased that NASPA has been asked to come and represent student affairs again. We're talking about democratic universities, democratic institutions, civic engagement. And this came about because of NASPA's work through Steve Nielsen and Frank Ardiolo and some others who have a task force on personal and social responsibility and working with AAC&U. In fact, before coming to NASPA, I worked at AAC&U on a huge grant project called Democracy, Diversity, and Liberal Learning. And so we've been involved in this in all kinds of ways. We now have an advisory board chaired by Brett Perazzi from Arizona State University for international affairs, trying to bring them all together. In fact, we have so many things going on, it seems like an octopus as far as international. So what we're doing with the advisory board is trying to pull them together and integrate them more. We have study tours with our sister associations. We have an international KC. I know I'm going to forget something, but when I think about NASPA wants to be international in all the things we do. We want to learn, and we want to have our colleagues, international colleagues, come to NASPA as well, and be members of NASPA.
It reminds me that learning doesn't see borders. There are no borders to
Absolutely.
learning.
Absolutely.
And I also want to point out that Donald White made a comment on Twitter a few moments ago, and it was sort of the idea of what about NASPA? The other associations that are out there, and I want to see NASPA and your sister association ACPA. They are sort of the umbrella associations that include practitioners from all over the place in all functional areas. You mentioned ASCA. So the work that NASPA is doing isn't interfering with any of the other associations. It's more like we're all sort of working together to build and create. And so I just wanted to point that out, that what NASPA is doing isn't sort of stepping on anyone else's toes.
I don't think so. No, I think, in fact, just before we came on together, our colleagues from NACA were here, from the Activities Association, and we're constantly looking for ways to collaborate with one another. And of course, they wanted to see the new office space. And before they left, we were talking about, here's another thing we can collaborate on. And many of our sister associations are collaborating on we began this consortium on government relations for student affairs years ago, just by NASPA calling members saying, let's get together. We'd have a stronger voice in this. We have had that move going along now, maybe 10 years. We collaborate on our knowledge assessment consortium that we do with campus labs. It's wonderful and giving us some kind of data that we can use. Our people have been screaming for data. We collaborated on Learning Reconsidered. We collaborate on the placement exchange. So our sister associations work with the general associations because we're all student affairs. We all have common goals here. And when we bring all that power together, we can really make a big difference in helping people with their professional development, which in turn helps us help students be successful.
Well, I think it was University of Arkansas. There was a news report last week that their fall enrollment was something like a third of their students, I think, were from out of state, which would include, I would imagine, a large international population. The I can't say it on the air because it's one of those words you can't say, but the internationalization of higher education in the U.S.
Great job.
Oh,
Great
thanks.
job.
Yeah, it's all about articulating. But it's an interesting concept because in student affairs, we still tend to sort of put functional areas into certain areas, and I would say sort of international programs is one that comes to mind, when in fact you look at a school like Arkansas, you can't say I'm in financial aid. If you're a student from another country, go talk to international programs. You have to be a practitioner that is ready and willing and knowledgeable to work with students from all over.
Oh, absolutely. You bring up such a good point here, Eric, because one of the things I am learning, and when I go on campuses and talk with students, I'm learning so much. And one of the things I've learned is this: when we have international students who come to campuses in the U.S., we often think about what we can learn from them. We know they're learning, but we don't often think about some of the support needs they have, other than getting the money right and living in. We don't. And when I talk to students who are from other countries, sometimes they say that they need more support than people think. Most of the time, they are very superior academically, and so if they're doing well in class, we just assume that they're doing well otherwise. Some of them have cultural barriers who are asking for help. I think we could put a lot more emphasis in that. And as far as having them have a great experience, I think that really falls in our bailiwick. in student affairs.
Absolutely. And I think, well, last Friday, and I keep referencing this, Gwen and I had a great conversation. It was about an hour long,
Yeah.
just a pre-show conversation. And one of the things we talked about was the idea, the concept that there's no such thing really as a traditional student anymore. And if you think about your students in that mindset that everybody is a sort of a quote-unquote traditional student, you're not serving your students appropriately, because when you talk about students from other countries, we haven't even touched upon the idea of, well, how does student affairs serve students who are engaging and learning through online education only? They're not even at our campuses. There's no physical space they're coming to. Mm-hmm. They're coming to us solely through the internet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This is something, what we're hearing, and people are writing about it and talking about it, is what students today want is they want us to be very flexible in how we deliver education. They want to be able to be connected in all kinds of ways. And they like this blended way of taking courses. If there are certain courses they want to be on campus, on site, they want to do that. If there are other courses they want to take at another institution and take it online, they want to do that. And I think we have to be ready for it. We can't look at them, as we used to say, traditional and non-traditional students, because everyone is unique. It's sort of like the Starbucks coffee almost. They're all unique. And what we're going to have to do is to hold their attention and to hold them in school long enough to complete, is to make sure that we can address that uniqueness in some ways. And a lot of that is around how I want my education delivered, and blending those courses. And as far as student affairs support on that, I don't think I'm not on campus, I'm not on the ground, so I don't know how it works, but I can't, how we're right now talking to one another. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's going to be that difficult for us to provide student services online.
Well, this is like NASA right now. I have a whole control panel. No,
yes,
it's not that hard to do. Yeah.
With all the advances in technology, with how comfortable our students are online, I think it's easier than ever for us to provide student services. I understand that Valencia Community College in Florida is doing a great job with that. University of Maryland, University College has been doing that for years. I think it's a matter of will when it comes to that. If we know what our students want and we want to retain them and have them persist to graduation, we're going to have to find out what student-centered means now. Student-centered means now, students say they want their education delivered in flexible ways. They want it at times that they want to take it. They want it more affordable. This is what they want, and they want to be connected. They like to live online, I understand, and so we've got to get online with them.
Well, and it reminds me of there's this upcoming conference, the NASPA Technology Conference
in
October, and
very exciting.
And the potential for collaboration with ed tech. When we talk about the academic affairs, student affairs side of the house, ed tech sort of always gets stuck in academic affairs. Well, think about the amazing things that ed tech folks are doing. They've been in this space, working with students, figuring out curriculum, pedagogy in that online space. Mm-hmm. We should be working with them so that we can figure out ways to sort of utilize student affairs in that space that they're already so well versed with.
Oh, absolutely. And with having that NASPA Tech Conference, and what you are bringing to us, your experience is so much more advanced than most people. I love it. I think I mentioned to you, I love it that you're saying it doesn't matter where you are on that continuum. If you're just starting out or if you feel more advanced, you're going to get something from that conference. But I'm thinking with that kind of professional development, student affairs could begin to take some leadership there. There are so many innovative things that we can do online. And I really appreciate your being willing to help in that area and bringing your expertise to that conference.
It's fun. I will say this. I look forward to the day when we go to a conference like EDUCAUSE, which is it sort of bills itself as technology and higher education. And when we go there and they say, "Oh, you're in student affairs," I know exactly what that is.
Yes.
Because right now I'd say it's a little behind. The vendors, the ed tech vendors, the technologies providers, they don't know us yet as well as they could. So I think that I'm excited for when that happens, because then I really think that at the end of the day, all of this stuff helps our students complete their degrees, persist with their education, and every single conversation that we have has to come back to what we're doing with our students.
But that technology is a new frontier for us. As we were talking just before the show started, I said, we think of technology as an area to study and learn. And when you talk with students, they say things like, we don't really think about it that way. It's just so natural for us. It's the way, our great grandparents thought about telephones, like, do you have a telephone? It's like, this is just natural. And so I'm thinking now student affairs could take a great leadership role in that and making sure that all of us in student affairs are very comfortable with delivering our services online and finding innovative ways to use technology. I think it's a new frontier for us. I really do.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that Matthew, and I apologize, Matthew, if I destroy your last name, but Matthew Pistilli asks or says the question out here on Twitter, how do you suggest that student affairs units approach information technology units on campus to develop new innovations to benefit student success? And I think that he sort of answers his own question. We have to approach them. We have to start the dialogue, the conversation. It hasn't necessarily, taken place as much as it could. So I think that, the first thing is approaching folks at the IT department at the national level. The EDUCAUSE, that association, if you were to ask a room full of NASPA conference attendees, what is EDUCAUSE? Tell me about it. I guarantee you they would say, edu what? And there's an opportunity right there to just start the conversation.
Yeah. It's a fine association. And Eric, I think you're so right in saying student affairs needs to reach out. Because when you look at what's on their plate, all they're being asked to do, if we could bring them something, these are the people who are open to innovation. They are open to new ideas. And if we could bring them something, I think they would be happy to work with us. As I said, I read the EDUCAUSE, the magazine, and when I look at all the things they're doing, in fact, there was one article about maybe 6 months ago, and it said something about student services. And I went, that's all about us. And, I read the article, and it wasn't about us at all, but it was called student services. Mm-hmm. So I think it is our job, just as you said, to reach out, and just as I've forgotten his name, the questioner.
It's Matt. Yeah, we'll hit him up on Twitter.
I can't do the last name since you probably destroyed it, right? But I think he was right in reaching out, going forward, bringing something of interest, bringing something innovative and creative. Everybody's looking for that.
Absolutely. Well, Gwen, as we wrap up the show today, I always like to ask my guests to sort of share, if they would, some of their favorite websites and favorite books. Because we're always reading, we're always looking at online for different things, and I'm always curious to know what it is that you're interested in. What do you read, and where do you go online?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm pretty, I'm pretty conservative when it comes to where I go online. I do what I have to do online because I think I'm busier than everybody else. Of course, I'm at the Chronicle. I do Inside Higher Ed. And I do the Huffington Post mainly. And then if somebody refers me to a website, I will go to that. Otherwise, I don't have others that I look at on a regular basis. As far as things I read, I do read a lot. And I was just telling one of my staff members today, Karan Sanan, who is our Director of Marketing and Communications. I said, I read so much, I can't sometimes remember what I read unless somebody asks me, have you read it? Some of the books I say, they are not necessarily my favorite ones, but they are ones that I go back to a lot. And one of them is Art Levine and Jean Curriton's When Hope and Fear Collide. I go back to that book a lot because I want to look at what did they find out from student affairs and from students in that generation. And now the most exciting thing I can think of is at our Assessment and Persistence Conference, Arthur Levine and Diana Dean came and revealed the new data they have on the newest generation of students. And it has not been revealed anywhere else that we know. They said we were the first to hear it, and the book won't be out for 2 years. And they're talking about what's important to our students today. So it's that kind of book I go back to. Another book is The Way We'll Be. John Zogby talked about who our students are today, how they're the most open generation ever. The most accepting generation ever, probably the smartest ever. I go to that one. One that struck me years ago was called A Hope in the Unseen. It was about a young man, Cedric Jennings, who went to college, went to high school here in the inner city in Washington, D.C., in an urban school, and he was followed by David Susskind, followed through his journey in his last year of high school and on to Brown University. And we were seeing what getting an education was like at a prestigious university through the eyes of a young African American man who had gone to an inner city or urban school. I found it, I don't know, it just touched me to see what the world looked like from his viewpoint. And I didn't have to go very far to see what the world looked like. So I'm thinking for others that had to be important. And then a book was a day. What the teacher, I wrote down what was A Life in School, What the Teacher Learned by Jane Tompkins. And she was at Duke at the time. Yeah, she was at Duke. And she talked about how faculty are so isolated and they're not on campus a lot. And she discovered student affairs. She discovered what was going on in her life, and she tried to bring that to students. And she realized that students weren't accepting it at the same place she did. It's interesting. I saw her do give a speech on that book at an academic conference very shortly after it. And it really touched me, and I kept going back to it. And do you know, the academicians in general did not like her speech. And I thought that was very interesting. She was discovering the other side of students. And some of them just didn't agree at all with it. So, another one I like is The Killer Angels. It's about that Gettysburg battle. I like that. I like it. It talks about, General Lee and Longstreet and Chamberlain and Buford. It's fiction, but it gives you a lot of history. But it's great to be in the minds of people who are real strategists, and people who are strategists and warriors, but they are such humane people in so many other ways. I really am moved by that. And I wrote one of my master's degrees. I got a master's in English Lit, and I wrote on the books of Toni Morrison. And those books are all very important to me.
Absolutely.
You don't want me to go on forever on this, but
I think you could. I mean, you've got your whole library that you could probably share, and we would listen.
Yeah, I love reading. I love talking to people about books, but people have to remind me almost of what I read. They'll say, well, have you read this? I go, oh, yes. But if they say, I tell you what I read recently, though, I hope our members will read. And that is, I think everybody's reading it, Academically Adrift by Aram and Roxa. Richard Aram was at the Secretariat meeting this past week talking about some of the data he had there. And I understand they have new data that'll be out in another year or so. It's very sobering. It's sometimes a crude analysis, as he says, but there are going to be people making decisions based on the data from that book. And I think unless we build a culture of evidence within student affairs, decisions are going to be made on the evidence in the book, and it does not show well for the benefits of student affairs. As people like to say, return on investment for student affairs. And I really think we've got our work cut out for us, but I think as our members who participate in professional development and keep up with what's going on currently, who are looking at assessment, who are understanding that student has to be defined more broadly, including adults. We're doing a wonderful project in West Virginia now, our Degree Now program, where we are working with student affairs and other areas at the colleges and universities, 2-year and 4-year colleges, to help them be prepared. It's called Train the Trainer. Be prepared to help adults who have some college credit come back to school and complete their degrees. So I just think we have to just stay focused on what is it we need to help these students succeed.
Well, Gwen, I think that, first of all, I want to thank you for coming on the show. I think
Is the hour up already?
Oh, we're almost done. Yeah, I think, one of the things I want to say is that, for you, as you were talking about the books that you read, the authors that you read, that kind of thing, the theme of persistence and completion and perseverance and the whole person, it's not just present in what you do professionally, but it's present in what you've done, sort of for your own educational benefit and your own personal passions. And I think that, from what I'm hearing is that's going to help you, because that means everything you're doing is coming from a place of authenticity, and it's not forced, and it's going to be really real.
Thank you so much, Eric. I try to be. Sometimes I think I shouldn't be as real as I am.
Oh, no.
Need to look at some other role models sometimes. But at this stage in my life, I think it's probably too late to do anything differently.
Well, I think, there's a certain amount of, experience that you bring to the table that has to be recognized. I mean, how long have you been at NASPA?
Well, it's 16 years now,
Oh.
and I like to refer to it as Sweet 16.
Oh, so what are you going to do next? You're going to get the keys to the car now, I guess?
So, we all have journeys, and I am looking for the next phase of my journey, and just very excited about it. I got a clean slate, and love being here at NASPA, but, at some point, it's time for other people to take over. So I am really looking forward to this next phase.
Okay, so you're kind of stepping away from NASPA, it sounds like, and someone else gets the job of dealing with a new boss every year.
Yes, and whoever gets this job is going to be the luckiest person in the world. They really are. It's a wonderful one. I don't know exactly when I'm stepping out of it, but I've told enough of our colleagues that I am ready for this next phase of my journey.
Well, I don't know what size your real shoe size is, but I would say this: that you're leaving behind a set of shoes that are probably at least a size 22 at minimum. So
you are so kind.
I'd say that in the 16 years, and it honestly, it feels like it's been longer than 16 years.
Well, that doesn't sound positive.
No, it feels like you've been there influencing and impacting folks for a lot longer.
Right.
And I think that, honestly, the legacy that you're going to leave behind is one of authenticity and being real, and so I hope that you never stop being real.
Thank you, Eric. You're so encouraging. I really appreciate it. I met the most wonderful people. The NASPA members, all of you all have been just wonderful. And it's so great when you all remember when we met. I think that's really fantastic. Sometimes I remember when we met, but I'm glad you do.
I didn't have a beard then, and I was much shorter. I've grown a lot.
Thanks for helping me out on that. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Well, Gwen, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Well, folks, obviously, Gwen is an awesome leader in the field of student affairs. What she's done with NASPA and just what she's done for students in general has been phenomenal and transformative. And so, really glad that she came on the show. Really excited about it. I wanted to give you a few notes for next week. I'm on the road traveling to the ISTE conference, which is all about education and technology and learning and more of the K through 12 sector in Philadelphia next week. So there isn't going to be a show on Wednesday. However, I do want to promote a show. My first show for July is going to be with Vijay Pendekar. He's from DePaul. He's the Director of Multicultural Student Success. And we're going to do an episode on July 6th that's all about social justice and student affairs. So stay tuned for that episode. I think it's going to be an awesome show. And just so you know, folks, this show, like every other show, is available at higheredlive.com. Once I get the archive up, it'll be there. Share it with your friends. Tell your friends and family about it if you want to. But folks, Student Affairs Live, I want to say really quickly, we couldn't do this without the awesome support from our sponsor. And we are sponsored by Integral. And Integral, they are the creators of the Schools app on Facebook. Please make sure you check out their webinar series about how they can help you leverage Facebook to increase yield and retention. And that webinar is going to happen this Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And we're going to send out a tweet with that link right now. And folks, thanks for watching. As always, this is Student Affairs Live, and we will see you in 2 weeks.